Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world. This is TC here. If you don't already know me, I am IT Lab's Chief Talking Officer, CTO. Do you like what we did there? I'm based out in the UK, as per the flag over there to indicate where I am. It's just a nice thing to have in the background. I'm based out in London, and today we're going to be doing one of IT Lab's webinar series, offering the tech community further learning on important subjects, things that you've asked for in the community, and things that are going to make your life easier, better, and potentially, if it all works out well, you'll be able to walk into the sunset happily ever after. And joining us from Macedonia here is Erin. Hello, Erin.
Hello.
Welcome. So Erin's going to be talking about business analysts today. I don't know about the rest of the audience here, but I've worked with lots of business analysts in the past, some great ones and some even greater ones. And the title of this talk is, as you probably know, BA walks into a bar full of tech leaders, which I thought was quite a funny title to a joke. And I'm really intrigued to see what happens when a BA walks into a bar. I was going to tell a joke, actually, walk into a bar joke. Shall I do that? Yeah, why not? So 2 conspiracy theorists walk into a bar. You can't tell me that's just coincidence, can you? That's bad, isn't it? Okay, yes. I thought I'd gonna give that a go. Anyway, so the webinar presentation is 30 to 40 minutes long, hopefully. And there will be some questions in between within the actual kind of talk. So send in your questions on the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen down here somewhere down here. So put your questions in there, and if I feel that they're appropriate for the time, at a certain time in the talk, I will interject and rudely interrupt Erin and throw the question in. And so have your pens and papers ready to kind of store up your questions if you want to kind of build them up towards the end. At the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A session with Erin to kind of dig deeper into the subject of business analysts. And I think that's it. So I guess in terms of the objectives that we're going to try and cover today, would you like me to kind of cover the objectives today, Erin?
Sure. Yeah.
So what the hell is a BA? What do they do? And what the hell don't they do? Okay, so we're going to try and answer that question. Can a BA act as a product manager? Can a BA be a PO? Hey, I don't know. We'll find out. And how can a BA benefit your project? And finally, if the client already has a BA, let's say, for example, you're doing work for another company and the company already has a BA, why would the software team recommend having one of their own as well? So there we go. So let's not delay any further. Erin, would you like to start your presentation?
Sure.
Would you like to introduce yourself first? What do you do?
Okay. Hi, Erin Traeger. I'm a senior business analyst over at IT Labs. So that has involved both clients' projects and as well prospective clients. So looking at things from a higher level or a deeper level, etc. Yes, been doing business analysis for a while.
Fantastic.
Let me go ahead.
Sure.
Let me know when you see the screen.
I see the screen, yeah.
Alrighty, so we've got our title, Business Analyst Walks into a Bar Full of Tech Leaders. That's me, Erin Traeger. All right, so as a BA, when I first heard the joke, a BA walks into a bar full of tech leaders, the immediate punchline I thought of was just due to what so much day in, day out and the BA immediately walks behind the bar, asks the tech leader a few questions, and then proceeds to form the perfect drink for them. All the while in painstaking detail, documenting that recipe. What are all the ingredients, the steps, in what order, what's expected in the end? Like I said, that's because so much of what you think of a BA doing day in, day out is talking to stakeholders, understanding what it is they want, and then coming up with a great solution for it. And of course, documenting that solution. So yes, that does cover a good deal of what a BA does. However, in reality, a better analogy would be that a tech leader is the manager of the bar. As well, there's also the owner, the accountant, the waiters, etc., with whom you may have varying degrees of interaction. And as well, they're also typically patrons of the bar. So they're using what you make. In this scenario, the BA is the master bartender mixologist. So they're responsible for setting the drinks menu, documenting all the drink recipes, determining what alcohol and other ingredients are needed. They're ensuring the staff is crystal clear on what needs to be done. All the while, they're ensuring those drinks can feasibly actually be created in enough time or in short enough time to keep up with the demand, and that those drinks will leave the patrons with a great experience wanting to come back again and again.
Cool.
So with that said, you may be saying, okay, that's great, but I already know what I want. So why would I need you? Or I have a BA, I have a product manager, I have a product owner. So why would I need you? Now, in terms of like, especially a product owner tends to be on a higher level. So in terms of this scenario that I was saying, they may be, say, for example, looking at what the market is and even potentially setting the drinks menu, but they're not really getting into those details, into the trenches. So that's where a BA comes into handy because they can, set all those details, etc. Similar, product manager tends to set roadmap, etc., but may not be getting into those details. So that's where it's really helpful to have a BA. And then as well, you'll have times where you have a client who has a BA, but they may be focusing on a wider picture and again, not focusing so much on what's getting done now or the details. And as well, you can also have things like, for example, in terms of our bar scenario, a screwdriver. Screwdriver in most places is vodka and orange juice. So sometimes it's also because the team that's working on it, it's not that they have no clue what they're doing, but they may not have that background of everything. So then if the BA is saying, make a screwdriver, well, for example, here, a screwdriver is a different drink. So it's also kind of helping with that lost in translation, giving some background context, etc.
Yeah. So, it's quite interesting. I've never had a screwdriver, by the way. I need to I need to try one of those. Probably the audience are laughing right now, thinking, what rock have you been hiding under? So in short, the BA is about the detail, digging down into the technical detail, or is it kind of the customer use cases and stuff as well?
So, there's a whole bunch of different levels the BA is operating at. A lot of people think it's completely the details, but in the end, as we'll get to in this webinar, is you also have to be able to sit at that higher level and understand the grand scheme of things, etc., and even where are you going. And that's where, like I was saying before, I've done both for prospective clients and existing clients, is especially if you're starting out on a project, you need to be able to form a picture of where that product's going to wind up, even if it's just for MVP, because how you decide what needs to get done, etc., is based on how you're seeing everything needs to be there. So, and with that, okay, yes, you can have the use cases, etc., but you are going to wind up having things in detail.
Right. Thank you.
So, and that's where we get the big picture. So here, for example, you may have clients who are saying, I know I want a bar, but it's just a basic structure that's in their mind right now. It's not fully fleshed out. You may have some who've got every last detail figured out, and you may have some who are kind of in between, and maybe some of those things, it's like, okay, maybe over here in the corner, you've got some weird stuff that doesn't quite mix in with it. And it's like, okay, maybe we need to figure out how to adjust that, etc. So with respect to that, one of the first things you're going to be looking at is, what is the plan and the purpose of this? Are there any future goals? How concrete are all these things? And then when you're coming in on an existing or a project in the middle, somewhere in progress, you're generally going to be asking the same questions, but you're also going to be trying to get some info on the background behind it, etc. Especially, also understanding, is this something of a total rewrite? Is this adjusting what is there now? Because especially if you're dealing with adjusting what's there now, you need to have some idea of the background to have better context behind what's going on and what you may be dealing with. Research. So in terms of market research, identifying and understanding the target audience. Who are the competitors? Where's your market niche? So in this case, are you dealing with a complete beer drinking crowd? Or are you dealing with people who want like really high-end, unique cocktails? Are you dealing with a mix? And that's where like a BA versus a product manager or even a product owner comes in, is that traditionally like a product owner, even maybe a product manager, would be helping identify the target audience, or there's already been research done on that. Same thing with market niche. A lot of times if that's already set, a BA can help with that. Competitor research, a lot of times that's going to be a product manager who's doing that, but a BA can definitely do it. The other thing is that traditionally, there are different job functions when you talk about a BA versus a product manager. And one of the difference is that a product manager, besides setting the roadmap, et cetera, is also a lot of times looking at marketing. They may be looking at sales, they're interfacing with sales, et cetera. Nowadays, as is the case with so many roles, you have kind of this bleeding out of lines of where your job ends, et cetera, and kind of having some more functions. And as well, more and more in the agile world, there's kind of this tendency to use the term product manager and BA interchangeably, but it's generally quite a bit more towards actually what a BA traditionally does with, say, like competitor research, product road mapping, that type of thing going in.
I've just realised, Erin, that we did have a poll for this, and I forgot to kind of throw it in there. But I mean, it'd be interesting to see what
People say.
What people say. Let's kind of throw that in there. Here we go. Bring up my poll tool. I'm going to allow you to have a go as well, Erin. So get ready with your selection. So, audience, do you think a BA can be a product manager? What are your thoughts? Off you go. Can people see the, oh, there you go. Oh, get some fluctuations here. We got, depends on if the it depends on if the BA has experience. It's kind of topping out there. Can you see the results there, Erin, or is that just me?
I can't at the moment.
No, I think it's just me. I'm special, so I'm allowed to see these things. My mum told me. Okay, I think that's kind of pretty much settled down. So end the poll, and I'm going to show you the results. And these are the results. So looks like, is this what you would expect to see, Erin?
I'd say in general, yes. Like I was saying, especially in Agile, there's a tendency to use the terms interchangeably. But I mean, when it comes to traditional roles, there are differences between a BA and a product manager.
Yeah.
And I mean, even because so much of your day in, day out goes with, eliciting, planning, eliciting, interpreting those results, coming up with a solution, documenting them, that, especially if you've got a lot of projects where you have a product manager or product owner, you may not get the chance to have that experience to be doing competitor research, product road mapping, et cetera.
Yes.
So from that point of view, yeah, I would agree with those results.
Well, that's good. That's interesting. And just to kind of, while we're on the subject, so I can't imagine the product owner, he or she is speaking directly to the end customer potentially. Well, no, not potentially, absolutely. Would the BA kind of join in there as well?
They could potentially. I mean, nowadays there's an increasing focus on analytics. And I mean, having like heat mapping and just knowing step by step, for example, where are people clicking? Where are you losing people? What are your attrition rates? A/B testing, et cetera, so that you can get not only the ideal experience and ideally a customized experience for those people, but also so you can know where you're losing them. With that said, there was a really interesting article someone shared with me the other day, which was talking about, it was same for product managers, but the same applies to BAs, is kind of like the time to be a product manager is over and you need to be a behavioral product manager, which I don't know if you've ever looked at behavioral economics, But if you look at like traditional economic stuff, a lot of times when you start getting into human behavior, what you would normally expect or predict isn't actually what happens.
Yes.
And so it's kind of like, yes, you recognize that customers are irrational and they'll also do things that you would never ever expect. And it was kind of arguing about part of that is looking at things and realizing how much your decisions on how certain steps should happen, et cetera, can really influence then the outcomes of those customers, not only what they're doing, but how they feel about things, et cetera.
Wow.
And then also that, you know, you need to take into account, and you may be looking at the analytics or speaking to the customers and being like, but how come this is so different from what I'm experiencing or I expected?
Yes, yes.
So yes.
It's almost the psychology of the whole, yeah, I mean, it's a kind of psychological kind of area to kind of look into here. It's interesting.
Yes, yes. So back to the research thing, third-party software and laws. In terms of third-party software, a really easy example would be, for example, if you've got a client that wants to put in payment processing, it may be that they say, I want Stripe, these are the general functions I want. So now what you're doing is just researching Stripe and saying, can we do all these functions? Are there any restrictions? How do we do it, et cetera? And then determining that solution based on it. And it may be that you say, wow, Stripe just doesn't work. We need to consider something else. On the other hand, back to the kind of like the ideas may not be completely super formed, is it maybe we just need payment processing, and you may have some very basic ideas of what needs to be there, or you may have some pretty well-formed requirements. And off of there, you're doing overall research to determine which third-party software would be the best for it. Sometimes even do it yourself, but a lot of times there's great third-party software that will work. And in terms of laws, being aware of them and how it affects what needs to get done, et cetera. You know, for example, some of the well-known ones are HIPAA, GDPR, or in the US, like CCPA and the related ones, dealing with privacy, et cetera. You know, or in the case of alcohol, there can be some pretty onerous alcohol laws for sales and mailing, et cetera, and depending on the type of alcohol. So, you know, things to be aware of.
It's quite interesting you mentioned GDPR, because in our newsletter coming out next week, we've got a whole article on GDPR, just a little bit of a plug for IT Labs there. So you'll be, if you're receiving the newsletter, if not, please subscribe, but we'll be doing a GDPR thing as well. So that'll be useful for our BAs out there, you know?
Yes, yes, it'll be great. So then moving on from research, you've got what needs to get done. So you've got the general high-level idea. One of the things is you need to identify who the stakeholders are. What's their sphere, so what are they dealing with, and what's their level of influence. And sometimes you've got one person who's saying, I'm the one who speaks for everyone. Sometimes you've got 20 plus people, etc.
Yeah.
And that's where you need to take things into account, especially like if you're dealing with one person who says, I'm speaking for everyone. Depending on their background and what they're currently doing, that can really flavor what they're telling you. So if you're dealing with that situation, you need to keep in the back of your head that what you're being told may not necessarily actually represent what is going on.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that in mind. And then when it comes to dealing with a lot of people is you can wind up having where a lot of conflicting ideas, et cetera. So for example, in the picture, this is like the kumbaya happy situation of, you know, they all are happy and clapping for the guy and saying, this is so great, we all align. But in reality, a lot of times you'll have various requests. You can't get everything, you know, say within that phase, et cetera. You may have conflicts between what's being requested. And in that case, besides just being aware of what everyone's asking for, you also need to know, is there someone who's the final decision maker, et cetera. And I mean, you have to be prepared to also defend things and argue, this really should be done and this is why.
Yes. I can imagine that you kind of get into a lot of politics and in amongst the politics, but also maybe have to play the politics to some extent.
You try to remain neutral, but I mean that's the other thing is a lot of times what you can find, it's not always true, but one thing you can find is that sometimes the people that excuse me, are seem to, seem to be like the most ignored or have requests that kind of keep getting pushed back are the ones
Yeah.
who are doing a lot of the day in, day out work. And so they're the ones who, you know, especially when you've got things that are making things inefficient, they're the ones getting really, really heavily affected by it and stuff. So, and it'll get into things we're covering in a second, but yes, it's kind of like, okay, keep in mind, they may not be the C-level executive who gets to say we're doing this, but, you know, if you're having to hire more people all the time, or, you know, you've got 20 people dealing with this simply because it's not efficient and they're all frustrated, even adding another 10 people, they're still all frustrated, which is not great for your business either.
No, that's right. Yes. I've got a kind of curious question around certain stakeholders being more available than others. So you may have stakeholders that aren't readily, they're not often available. So let's say, for example, one of these stakeholders who's usually kind of AWOL suddenly kind of appears on the scene and starts, do you take what they say with equal gravity?
I think you have to know where they stand, et cetera. And you also, I mean, as well, sometimes you'll have stakeholders who show up and what they're telling you doesn't necessarily like, okay, their normal job function is this, and what they're telling you may be partially their job function and maybe a whole lot wider, it may be completely different. So from that, you're kind of filtering it out. But it's also like, if this is someone that's like totally underrepresented and you know you need to cover it, I mean, the first thing is you're just taking that opportunity to you know, grab them and get what you can out of it, and then
Right.
you're evaluating it against everything and in the scheme of things, and okay, how does it fit in, etc. Is it something that's like really high priority? Should it be down the road?
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I have got a question from the audience here as
Okay.
well, from Risto. Thank you, Risto, for your question. As a BA, I'm sure Erin is dealing with many different personalities occupying a variety of positions. What would be the best approach? What would be the best approach when dealing with a difficult stakeholder from a stakeholder engagement perspective?
I think it depends upon how they're being difficult. I mean, you definitely have to have patience, and that sometimes can be trying in its own way. And you have to try and quickly understand their personality, etc. I mean, in terms of difficult, like there are times you've got some that will raise their voice very quickly, and you just have to understand that's their personality and let it roll off.
Cool.
You'll have others that just aren't very forthcoming, or who want to control every last detail, or who are responsible for something and just aren't providing it, etc. And so based on that, you need to take appropriate action. And I mean, especially when it comes to if you've got stakeholders who aren't providing needed information, there are various steps you can take to escalate it. And at a certain point, if they're just not providing that, then you say either we don't have enough information to proceed with this, or we are going to be determining what we feel is best.
Yeah.
And if there are changes needed, we can do that in the future.
Yes. Okay. That's good. Yes, I can imagine you come across. I just could use the image here that you got on screen. I can imagine just as the camera disappears, it turns into I don't know, a big kind of ball of dust and you know. Yeah, I can just imagine what it turns into once the camera's disappeared. But yeah, I've been in situations where the conversations get quite heated. People kind of get very married to their viewpoints and the way they want things done, you know? Yeah.
I mean, you'll have some stakeholders who will say, I want exactly this, and they don't want any discussion about it. You'll have some who just get really argumentative, but if you sit there and say, hold on, and you're firm with them, they'll back down. So, I mean, it's a lot about understanding who the personalities are and knowing how you need to deal with them to get what you need.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers Risto's question.
If not, tell us.
Yes. Throw in another question. Insist. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Erin.
Yes, and then the next thing is solution versus goals and avoiding bias and conflicts. So solutions versus goals, it's kind of like a lot of times what you'll get is something like, I want exactly this. And it's something that just like fits into the existing application. And a lot of times when you look at it, you're like, okay, that's a little odd. It'll almost be like someone coming up and ordering a drink and saying like, I want Irish cream and I want chocolate liqueur. So you're like, okay, that makes sense. And I want apple juice and I want pineapple juice and I want, something sour. And you're like, hold on, this is kind of weird, sour, sweet, chocolate, like what's going on here? And when you start asking questions, what you find out is they're trying to solve some issue or they have a goal. But a lot of times what happens is it's, okay, so this is what I figured out would work to meet those goals or those issues. And the thing is, like, as BAs, you're looking at the whole picture and you're aware of everything that's going on and what's developed and what's coming up, etc. So from that point of view, a lot of times, and of course you're a fresh face on things, if you start talking about goals instead, then you may come up with completely different solutions than what was originally stated. I mean, as well, it may be that there are multiple goals, either now or in the future, and so a completely different solution would address multiple goals. So that's a lot of times you kind of, if you're hearing solutions, you start trying to guide the conversation more towards what are the goals you're trying to achieve. And then in terms of avoiding bias, this is something that admittedly can be really difficult, especially when you've got an existing application, is that as soon as you start hearing what it is they're looking for, it's like, oh yeah, and we could do this with the application, and we could do that. Oh yeah, okay, no, can't do that. Okay, we'd have to switch it. And ideally what you need to be doing is hearing out what those needs are, what those requirements are, and then in the end saying, what is the ideal solution then? So that's that thing of avoiding the bias, because again, it can flavor and affect what you wind up doing.
Yes.
And then in terms of conflict, same thing is a lot of times you'll get requests either from this within one request or just overall something that exists, something that's set for the future that conflict with each other. So, being proactive and bringing those up and then saying, okay, like, is the conflicting thing more important and it makes this new request obsolete? Do they both need to exist? If so, now let's find a way to adjust so that they can be in harmony.
Yeah. A yes and kind of thing,
Yes. And then again, what needs to get done? One of the key things you're going to ask is what's the business value? So in the case here, you may be looking at these images saying, what? So imagine this is like club soda or tonic water. So if you're a bar, and let's say you don't have any of these things. So, okay, you can do like beer. You may be able to do drinks like the example, the screwdriver, vodka, and juice. But you've got a lot of cocktails you could be offering that you can't because you don't have tonic water or club soda or whatever we're going to say it is. So if someone said, I think we should invest and get club soda, that's a pretty good business value. I mean, if your clientele is looking for cocktails, that's a great business value. If they're looking for beer, maybe not. Whereas on the other hand, if someone comes and says, I think we need this obscure alcohol from, Japan or wherever, and you say, why? Well, because it gives me energy and I really like it. Well, if not so many other people are asking for it, that doesn't really provide such great business value. And then looping back to the thing about stakeholders and those who are kind of misrepresented or don't get such a strong voice is a lot of times if you're dealing with clients who are sitting in an office, a lot of what they're hearing is from their fellow coworkers. And while they see data from customers, they may talk to customers a lot of times because just by the nature of being close to the coworkers, they're hearing and seeing a lot of that, a whole lot more. So from that point, sometimes you're getting a lot more requests that serve the internal workings more than the customers that are using that software.
Right.
And so you kind of have to determine, okay, yes, this has business value, but is it such great business value that it it deserves to go ahead of something that helps the customers out.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
again, if you're losing a bunch of time on this stuff and it's just killing everything and customers are getting upset because of it, yeah, then definitely it's worth doing.
So that's an interesting subject because one of the things I'm a big fan of is OKRs. You know, the outcomes. You know, and key kind of results. And I've seen this in projects as well, where projects have kind of gone down a rabbit hole of kind of technical solutions, but forget the kind of end user. It's just about delivering an output of some sort. So that I find that interesting. I'm always looking at the business value, the value to the end customer, and obviously the business as well.
And I mean, that's the thing is you could even have a product owner and a product manager, and you still need to check yourself and be asking this, because what you can find is that they are getting a bit beholden to the internal workings, et cetera, and may sometimes forget to ask that question of what's the business value, what are those outcomes. So, I mean, even it's the same thing with competitor research. You may have the client doing competitor research, but it doesn't mean you should, at a minimum, look at the output of that research, because you could be better understanding what's going on in the market and better understanding or suggesting where things should go based on that.
Oh, I've got another question coming
Okay.
here around upselling. Okay, so let's say, for example, you as the BA have got in your vast understanding of the product and the detail that you're digging down to, you come up with something that hasn't been asked for by the end customer, and you try to bring in this idea. So where do you sit in terms of upselling?
In terms of things, you know, there's a lot of times where you could see that there's something that would be great business value. So maybe it wasn't asked for by the customer, but you're saying either I could see now or in the future that this could provide great business value. It would enable us to do a lot of things. And from that point, that's great. If it's strictly to the point of I can make my company some money, but the client doesn't need it, that's not okay. So it should be, and I mean, it's the same thing with a proposed solution. You should not be looking at how can we stretch it out as long or make the most money off of it. You should be looking at what fits the needs of the client.
Yeah, excellent. I hear you.
Yes. Any other questions?
No, that's it at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, so then constraints and risks, that's where we've got the absinthe on the right. In terms of things, actually, apparently technically it's not true that absinthe is banned in a number of states, but most people think it is. There were drinks like Polish buffalo grass vodka that unless they pasteurize the blade of grass, it is banned. And in that case, for example, that would be a constraint, because if you wanted to make a bunch of drinks based off of absinthe, you're going to be in trouble if it's illegal. You could then look at it and say, okay, well, that's a constraint, but guess what? Jägermeister is pretty close to it in taste. So let's do Jägermeister, but also if the taste is slightly different, we need to make some adjustments. So a lot of times you're looking at what you know are your fences that are being put around you. How does that affect what you're doing? And risk, similarly, you know, let's say in this case you're heavily putting drinks based on some alcohol that comes from one distributor in a foreign country, and this distributor is known to just change their formulas or stop selling stuff. That's a pretty big risk. And so, you know, you have to not only be aware of the fact that you have the risk of they could change the formula and now it tastes totally different, that they could just stop selling it, or, hey, the country could have a problem and you can't get the stuff regularly. And from that point, you have to make the choice. Is this something I want to proceed with? And ideally, okay, then what is my game plan should things happen like that? Now, those are negative risks. On the other hand, let's say that country has a fluctuating currency rate. A positive risk is that the currency fluctuates in a way that it makes it super cheap for you to buy, and you now have a win on your hands. So there's both positive and negative risks, but a lot of times you wind up hearing much more about the negative risks of things.
Yeah. I've never tried absinthe, by the way. It's made me want to try it now.
So now, assuming you've gotten to the point of having a solution, which side point, especially in the agile world, a lot of times you can have understood what the requirements are, and you can either, as a BA, have the requirements and then come and work with the team on what are possible solutions, or you could be coming up with potential solutions and then going to the team and deciding. And with respect to that, technically, like, you should be writing all the details as the team is implementing, but traditionally you're writing it up front. So in terms of this, these images I think are really great representations of different types of documentation. Like at the bottom, you've got a mojito, which, okay, like based on the picture, we know it's got some type of like soda, water, whatever. It's got some rum, it's got some lime, some mint, some sugar. And we kind of have a general idea of what it's supposed to look like based on the picture, but we don't have any idea, okay, what amounts of everything are you supposed to put in what order? Are you supposed to shake it? Are you supposed to stir it? Are you supposed to just dump it all in and, hand it over to the customer?
Yeah.
And I mean, with that, one bartender to another could make a wildly different tasting drink. Whereas the top one, the woo-woo cocktail, which I had never heard of this before. But I mean, this one not only shows detail, but it's also great because, I mean, if you look at like the shaker on the left-hand side, you know exactly how much to put in. For example, 2 ounces of vodka, you know in what order to put it in. So it's almost like a flow chart in terms of, or a diagram as to what order you're supposed to do things. It tells you to shake it. So not only, I mean, you've got all the details, and then in the end, you got this nice little picture of the woo-woo cocktail. So you also know what you're gonna get. And I mean, one of the great things, and this is something that as a BA sometimes is easy to forget because you're really like down mired in the details, is that, for example, if someone came and said, hey, I need your advice, can you help me? It's a whole lot easier if, say, you've got an image that gives you an idea of what the end result is. You got some flow charts, some diagrams to understand the general process, and off of that, you're like, okay, I've got question A, question B, question C. And then if you're going and reading the details, it's like, oh, okay, question A answer, question B, question C, etc. So it's much quicker to understand. Besides the fact that, I mean, between developers, QA, and your clients, you've got different ways that they're understanding things, processing. So, I mean, as much as you can to use when necessary images and flowcharts and diagrams and text, it's really helpful.
Yeah. And
ideal, yeah.
Just out of interest, Erin, do you ever use video to describe stuff?
I personally haven't used video for requirements. When it comes to, now with that said, with bugs, I have used video to show it. And with that said, sometimes when you realize that it's maybe part of it's a bug, but maybe part of it is like, hey, I want this changed. That's where, assuming you've got an existing solution, it can be helpful. It's like, okay, I'm doing this, this, and this, and guess what? Here, this doesn't make sense to me. I think we need to change this. Now, obviously, you could do that through screenshots, etc. But sometimes it's just, quicker to do it with video. Yes, if that's an acceptable form of documentation, yes.
I've got a question here around kind of budget and timeframes. So let's say, for example, that does become a constraint. There's only a limited amount of money, which is usually the case, especially in this day and age. So in terms of proposing solutions, does a BA analyst put their kind of like CFO type hat on, and check the financials out and to make sure it kind of fits from that respect?
From that respect, there has been some argument, especially amongst some other people, about the fact that realistically that shouldn't be biasing us. But I mean, if you think about it, just like it's important to know, are you dealing with 1 million users, 50 million users? Are you dealing with 5 users? Because your solutions are going to vary. The same thing is, you may have a client who overall, their total budget is maybe, say, huge, maybe it's small, but also they may come and say, I need this feature, but I just need it to do the basic things. This is not something I'm like super focused on. I don't want to spend more than this amount on it, etc. And from that point of view, you could say, okay, in an ideal world, we would do a solution more like this, but based on what you're saying with budget and everything else, this is what we would recommend. And typically, I mean, every so often they'll say, okay, can we find like a somewhere in between that wouldn't cost a whole lot more? But yeah, I mean, because you can spend a bunch of time finding the solution and documenting it, but if in the end, it needs to be done in 2 weeks, a month, and it's going to take a year, or it's going to cost a whole lot more than they're looking to do, you've spent a whole lot of time and effort that's essentially going to naught. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that gets kind of quite tough actually, because you can come up with some great solutions, but they're going to cost a huge ka-ching on the old budget, So, yeah.
Well, or like we even had one instance where the client wanted to do something really interesting, but at the time, the amount of processing power it would take, and as a result, the amount of time it would take to output results was something where you're like, this is a really great idea, but unfortunately at this time frame, it's not really the business value of it. You're not going to get that ROI on it.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
yes. Any other questions?
No, that's good at the moment. Thank you.
All right, so you got everything documented. The client says, yeah, go ahead. So you've got implementation. You got to make sure everyone is clear. Do they know what needs to get done? Do they have any questions? As well, going into that, while you're deciding what needs to go next, you need to make sure it's the right order and the right amount of work. Consider, for example, if you off the bat said, okay, users sign in. What do you do if you haven't implemented users yet, or even user roles that have permissions behind it? How is someone going to sign in? It doesn't work. So you have to consider those things, and right amount of work. Like we were saying at the beginning with a drink, you could have a beautiful cocktail with this really nice garnish, but if it's going to take 10 minutes to make, and you don't have that time, that's not great. Or even, let's say you've got something that's really front end heavy, and let's say you've got 2 front ends, 1 back end, et cetera. You want to make sure, okay, we have things, but it's enough for 2 front ends to be kept busy, for 1 back end to be kept busy, et cetera. You don't want it totally off balance.
Yeah. Cool.
And then testing. So QA really should be doing the heavy testing, but as a BA, you're supposed to be completely aware of what things are doing in the environment, how they're supposed to be, what your stories are intended for and should be doing. So you're coming back, and I mean, you're not having to do heavy testing, but you're checking and saying, okay, yes, this hits basic scenarios, it's good to go. And then you're doing a client demo, almost like, okay, I made this pretty cocktail, go taste it, and you're getting that feedback. And if everything's golden, it goes into production. And in an ideal world, they love it, etc. Sometimes you get feedback that maybe they kind of love it, but maybe not so much. Or, in the case of the irrational customers, you may get things totally unexpected, and that's where you kind of need to implement it into a virtuous cycle and take that feedback and work it into the next step you're working on and keep it in mind.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the beauty of Agile compared to, the old style, is that because things are getting out in shorter period, you're able to get that feedback, and you haven't completely documented the end product, so you can take it and work it in.
Yes. Yeah.
And then roadmap, backlog maintenance, and new features. So, for example, here, this is supposed to be a screwdriver. You got your orange juice, your vodka, whereas you got this really beautiful cocktail over here, which also has orange juice and vodka. So a lot of times you'll get a client who asks for the thing that's kind of like the end product, but it's like, and I made it in 2 months or something like this. So, you're looking at what is MVP, the minimal viable product, which in this case, if your goal is get a drink out to the customer, you can still have a very happy customer with vodka and orange juice.
Right.
Yes, it's great to have that cocktail, but you don't need it immediately. And you also can build up to that great cocktail and having it be available.
Yeah.
So that's where you kind of consider what actually needs to be done to be usable versus what's the long-term goal. And then backlog maintenance, you've got to keep on top of that. So
Yes. Yeah.
And make sure it's not obsolete. You've got things ordered, which that kind of leads into the next thing, the summary. As a BA, you're a lot of times getting into the details, but you still need to be able to keep track of the big picture. You need to be able to switch back to that view. You need to have useful documentation. I mean, if no one can understand it, it's not real.
Yeah.
So, and you need to be driving where you're going in an organized manner. So with respect to that, on the right, you've got everything very nicely ordered. The bartender can come up and just grab exactly what they need, put it back. It's not like it's so crammed that, they're struggling to put it back, etc. They know what they're doing. They know where it's at. The one on the left is a bit of chaos. If you'll indulge me, this is actually a real picture from an NGO, a humanitarian organization. And in this case, imagine that if you see to the left the water bottles, that was kind of, shall we say, the organized backlog. In this case, they put out a call for donations and they got deluged with donations, kind of like a lot of times you'll get deluged with, new requests, etc. And they just come flying in. And in this case, this is taken from the stairs, so you couldn't even get up the stairs without having to essentially roll over bags of donations.
Wow.
And the thing here, which is so similar to dealing with a product and software and everything, is, so this one, the backlog, if you will, the food, et cetera, was really quite well organized before the donations came in. But you're also dealing with the fact of you need to make food packages, which, you need a place to actually make the packages and a place to put the food to make the packages, and then you need a place to put the output of those, the food packages, and you've got people coming in and out who need to take those, so you need a clear path to it, as well as you're dealing with like clothing and other goods. So in this case, you've got a bunch of volunteers, so new people that you've got to get up to speed really quickly, some who are appropriate, say, for making food, some not. And you're dealing with, and by the way, we need 2,000 food packages in a couple hours. So, like, okay, we've got to quickly get a path to the food. We've got a clear area for making the food. We've got to make sure that wherever people put those packages, the people can come in and get them and get out quickly, et cetera. But as well, we've got to get through organizing all this clothing, et cetera, these other donations. So, it's very similar to dealing with that of, kind of juggling that, like, what are my amount of resources for making the food? What are my resources for sorting this stuff?
Yeah.
If I'm not keeping, up to speed on that backlog, wow, you can get overwhelmed really quickly.
Yeah. Okay. Just from personal experience, I've seen backlogs get into a pretty heavy mess, and actually they become a constant firefight. So it's good to kind of keep on top of this stuff. I've got a question here from Maggie actually. Maggie's asking, do you document your high-level testing for as a BA?
The high-level testing?
Yes, yeah.
You mean the testing we've done or for QA to do?
For QA to do, I guess. Yeah.
For us as a company, a lot of times we're writing the requirements, and off of that at the start, they're coming up with the various test cases and we're reviewing them. Assuming, let's say, the first batch are all okay, then generally they're running with it. If we're finding a lot of issues, like maybe they're not understanding, not only do we need to look at the documentation, but we may continue to review as well. Generally, like, haven't done so much Gherkin, which then a lot helps with like automated testing, but have started recently on some clients to write that. So, and acceptance criteria, et cetera. So that's helping with, understanding what's got to be tested.
Yes, yeah. Excellent. So hopefully that answers your question, Maggie. There was a follow-on question from Maggie. So it's testing the requirements. So that'll be the kind of QA kind of people making sure that...
The really heavy testing, yeah, that's QA. In terms of when QA says everything's good to go, et cetera, then you're doing somewhat acceptance testing. So you're running through a couple scenarios and saying, does this function as I expect? And if it's not, then you're rejecting it and saying it needs to be fixed for this. If it does, you're like, okay, yes, it's okay. At which point then when it comes time and you've done the client demo and then it goes up to say like UAT environment, the client is doing their own testing.
Sure, yes, yeah. Okay, that's excellent. Thank you for that. Is that are we at the end now?
We're at the end.
Yeah, I wasn't too sure. So I've got a final poll here that we're gonna throw into the mix. So the question is, what do you secretly wish you could ask or tell your BA? So there you go. You can do this one as well, Erin.
Oh, I can.
So what do you secretly wish you could tell your BA? The questions, so many questions. I never thought someone could create so many stories for a function. Yeah. Bless you for not making me worry about the details. Yeah, that's probably a good one, actually. I've kind of been there before. Tell the BA that you've never read the documentation. Oh, that's going to hurt. And how do you keep all the requests straight? That seems to have got a few votes. Oh, that's going up, as I said it. I think that's kind of a bit of bias going on there. And I'd like to be more involved in the details. Yeah, so if a software engineer came along and said they want to get involved in more of the details, or one of the stakeholders, you kind of mentioned this earlier, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's show the, yeah.
I mean, sometimes you'll have some clients who it's like, I just want to tell you the basic idea. You figure out everything else, and you're supposed to be the expert, so I trust whatever you say. You'll have others who really, really want to be involved in the fine details.
Yeah. So here we go. Oh, don't want to relaunch. Share the results. There we go. So we got a draw on bless you for not making me worry about the details. I think there's some comfort there. And how do you keep all these requests straight?
So see, it's the minority who say, I'd like to be more involved in the details.
Yes, right.
But see, I've never read your documentation.
Yes.
That does happen. So.
And so how does that make you feel?
I mean, you're kind of like, especially clients sign off on this and say, yes, this is what I expect to happen. So you kind of groan if you hear it. But I mean, let's face it, it's like you're trying to make it in a way that makes it as easily understandable as possible, yet covers everything. But let's face it, I mean, you get the IKEA manual for making some furniture. Who actually reads that stuff, even though it's pictures with IKEA?
Yeah.
I mean, most people aren't actually reading the instructions. It's kind of similar as you have to realize that it's not people's favorite thing to do. So
yes.
Yeah, it's kind of trying to find a way to make sure like they really understand it.
Yes, yeah. And in terms of you kind of as a BA, talking to the various stakeholders and kind of technical experts, the tech leaders out there, I can imagine that you kind of start to make their ears bleed with so many questions. That's one of the options on there. I mean, do you find that? Are people quite receptive to it? What's your experience in that?
It varies. Some people are perfectly fine. Some really don't want to deal with it. I would say you as a BA need to pick up on when that's happening. But I mean, if a client says, okay, yeah, on that one, no, like just go figure it out, I'm fine with that. I can go figure it out and come back with a recommendation. In fact, a lot of times, I mean, you should be doing that. So, I mean, no worries.
Yeah.
That's what you want.
And so it's kind of coming to a close. Thank you for that, Erin. That was interesting. I've worked with BAs before. I've worked with some excellent ones. And obviously, I'm talking to an excellent one, just to throw a compliment in there. Hopefully, our BAs and various other kind of tech leaders and tech community out there have kind of learned something you're interested. It sounds like somebody's building a backlog in the background there.
Of course, hey, at least the neighbors aren't drilling right now, but I don't know what they're doing down there, but they're moving something heavy.
They're moving something heavy.
Yeah, I think they're doing construction with backhoe or something.
Yeah. So in terms of to our audience, what would be your biggest takeaway or takeaways on this subject? What would you like to kind of offer them to kind of take away from this? The biggest thing.
You're asking me,
or
yes,
you're asking
the audience?
Yeah. No, I'm asking you.
No, I mean, I think there's a variety of ways in which a BA can add value. I mean, I think a huge amount of it is just that managing all those requests and determining in what order they should go into and worrying about the details and making sure then that the team is on the same ground and understanding each other so there aren't like these mismatches in how things get done.
Yes, yeah. So it's a lot of information. So I guess you've got to be able to hold a lot of information in your head and kind of build up those mental maps to build the picture, you know?
I kind of joke that BAs have a very low risk of ever getting like Alzheimer's or dementia because they're constantly thinking.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Oh, we've got a question kind of pop in. What's the time? We've got a few more minutes. You mentioned that when the client has their own BA, you recommend having one for the company as well. How's that work? Oh, that's a good one. Thank you for that, Elena.
So in terms of things, I mean, sometimes the client will say we don't need one, but still the team may ask for the BA to consult, and sometimes still you would have one with the team. And a lot of it then, depending on how that relationship plays out, like for example, a lot of times on the client side, they may be dealing on, say, a wider focus and not so much on what you're working on. So then from your side, you're dealing with specifically what your team is working on, et cetera. And sometimes that's a matter of you are talking BA to BA, and sometimes there really isn't any interaction between the BAs. And so from our side, we're dealing more with the stakeholders in that front and stuff. And then in terms of kind of consulting, it's again kind of like that lost in translation or things where it's like, can you help clarify? Can you help give us the business context? Like not quite understanding what they mean by this. So providing that greater context to things.
Yes, yeah. So I guess it kind of creates a stronger bridge in terms of getting that detail and understanding on both sides of the fence kind of thing. Because everybody's got their own perspective, I guess, you know, where they're coming from. Yeah. So hopefully, Elena, that's kind of answered your question. I think we've kind of come in under time, under the radar of the end, the top of the hour. So that's excellent. So thank you, audience, for joining us. Thank you, Erin. I've definitely learned some stuff. I've got a more appreciation. My biggest takeaway, other than the information you gave on the BA, is to go away and try some absinthe and no, I'm only joking, and a screwdriver, obviously. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting perspective and an analogy to kind of wrap a subject around. So to the audience, thank you for joining us. Hope you got good value out of this. We'll be putting up a page with information and slides on there. Obviously, you can contact us if you want to know more about what we do here and also what Erin does as a business analyst. If you've got any kind of questions, please send them through. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and our podcast. And as mentioned, we will be putting this up onto the website and on YouTube for you to listen to later. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Erin.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye-bye.